right, good morning. I have 9 a.m. We'll get going. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on December 10th, 2021. Thank you all for joining us remotely via WebEx event. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We will conduct a closed session this morning to discuss one topic, the quarterly enterprise risk management update. We will conclude the discussion no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We will begin public session at approximately 10 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Moody, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
We do. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 9:01 a.m., to discuss one topic, the quarterly enterprise risk management update. A closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves matters that are confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product doctrine, and involve the discussion of security for district property and utility infrastructure information. Do I have a second?
Second.
Wagner,
Yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Mulhoff,
Yes.
Moody,
Yes.
Spurgeon,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Yoder.
Yes.
Motion carried.
The motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding the quarterly enterprise risk management update. No votes or other action will be taken. Okay, at this time, public attendees will be removed from the WebEx event. We'll stop the WebEx event recording and lock the event to prevent attendees from joining the meeting. All right, we'll get going again. A motion and second is required to reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Sinners?
Oh, are you
here?
able to speak? Because we can't hear you.
I can take roll.
Thank you.
This is here. I'll just go through the screen. Director Bachner,
Yes.
Director Williams,
Yes.
Director Moody,
Yes.
Director Mulhoff,
Yes.
Director Spurgeon,
Yes.
Director Yoder,
Yes.
Director Howard,
Yes.
Director Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Motion to come out of closed session at 10:01 a.m. is carried. The closed session was limited to discussion regarding one topic, the quarterly enterprise risk management update. No votes or other board action were taken during the closed session. Earlier before the closed session, I made the announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. Members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Per the board's guidelines for public participation, we do not take public comment during the all committees meeting. We will take public comments at the board meeting on Thursday, December 16th. The board meeting will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center and will begin at 6 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx events. For your awareness, in August, the board approved a resolution to require In-person attendees wear masks at our meetings. We are following the Centers for Disease Control recommendation to wear masks indoors when Douglas County is designated by the CDC as an area of substantial or high transmission of the COVID-19 virus. We also want to encourage everyone to get vaccinated. Joining me today via WebEx are my fellow board members, Mike Kavanaugh, Sarah Howard, Janice Mulhoff, Craig Moody, Mary Spurgeon, Eric Williams, and Rick Yoder. We also have President and CEO Javier Fernandez, our General Counsel Steve Bruckner with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, members of our executive leadership team, and OPPD staff. Additionally, we have several attendees in this meeting consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. We conducted a closed session earlier to discuss one topic, the quarterly enterprise risk management update. Today, we will hear the following committee reports. Director Moody will provide the governance report. Director Yoder will provide the finance report. Director Williams will provide the systems management and nuclear oversight report. And Director Mulhoff will provide the public information report. Javier Fernandez will now give the safety briefing.
Certainly, thank you, Director Bogner. First, on the left side, you can see our physical safety reminders, and this is important for all of us. If you're not feeling well or you have a medical condition that may escalate, please let someone in your vicinity know. If you're participating remotely, make sure that you send the message to the web host or someone on the line so that we can assist if you need medical assistance and you're participating remotely. The other one is, as the holidays come in, and I'm going to talk about falls later on, but make sure that your area is free of trip or slip hazards. Usually with holiday decorations, extension cords and decorations can get in the way. So just make sure that you take a moment to look around yourself. If you have to evacuate in a quick manner, make sure that you have a path that it's clear to exit your area of work. Please take a moment to identify the location of the nearest AED if you're in a public building and you have an AED. And also if you're at home, first aid kits and fire extinguishers. If you don't have them, we highly recommend you purchase some for your home. Make sure that you look at, you're familiar with the exits and exit routes, including stairwells. And I would say, typically, this time of the year is not a typical time for tornadoes, although we have seen that reminder just a few days ago that tornadoes still happen. So make sure that you have plans to shelter in place if you have a tornado or severe weather like we will likely have tomorrow with high winds. The other piece that I would like to cover on the safety briefing, and I won't read the whole slide, but on the psychological safety reminders, I'm going to go with the number one point here, which is break the golden rule. And I wouldn't say necessarily break it, but enhance the golden rule. Don't only treat others how you would like to be treated, but rather treat them as they like to be treated. That really provides a good psychological safe environment for all of us to voice our opinions, our concerns, and be able to have a good positive dialogue. Ms. Hinders, if you could move to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the current safety focus we have with slips and falls on ice and snow. The change in weather and temperatures provide a perfect recipe for hazardous conditions. When you have freezing water and then warm weather and then the water freezes again, just make sure that you know and you're aware of your surroundings when you're getting in and out of your vehicles, for example, and out of your houses. Make sure that you take a closer look at those puddles that may look like puddles, but they may actually be frozen. Winter driving, it sounds like we all have to be reminded again of winter driving and considering all the hazards associated with winter driving. Again, especially tomorrow will be a windy day. Please consider staying home or try to limit your traveling during these times. And last but not least, I mentioned the holidays and decorations and lights, etc. Make sure that you keep an eye on that, ensuring cords and power strips and portable heating equipment are inspected frequently, and that you take a close look at where you're putting those in your homes. because that is a very, very frequent source of fires and accidents. And that concludes my safety briefing.
All right, Director Moody, Governance Committee report.
Thank you, Director Bogner. The Governance Committee met on December 9th. You're taking a look at the agenda now. There are a few things that I want to highlight from our conversation that I think are going to be important for us going forward. The first is we did a little bit of 2022 board planning, and I'm going to decouple these a little bit. We had a good conversation about board officer elections and committee assignments. We will talk later in this meeting about our meeting schedule, so I won't mention that. With respect to board officer elections and committee assignments, backtracking to our October workshop, there was pretty clear consensus among us colleagues that we were interested in and would like to pursue retaining board officers and committee assignments as they are. So in other words, my experience is that they transition every year. We learned from or at least I should say, I learned from Director Kavanaugh that that's not the norm. Previously, they would carry over for a couple of years so that we had some consistency. And I think generally speaking, during the workshop, we all felt like that was a pretty darn good idea. So the committee met and discussed this just to kind of firm up that that was in fact our desired approach. And it was of the governance committee. The four of you that are not on the governance committee, I connected with you separately to double check and make sure that there wasn't something that we had missed in our conversation from October until last week. And the four of you also affirmed in personal conversations that retaining board officers as they are and keeping committee assignments as they are is desired. So a couple thoughts on that that I'll just offer, and then I'll leave a little bit of space for committee members and others to offer thoughts. I think the main thing here that we're after is avoiding that kind of awkward learning curve that exists from roughly January until, if we're honest, probably March, to get up to speed on the committee's work, to make sure you understand it, ask all the questions that have been asked over the course of a previous year. More than anything, I think this just gives us the ability to continue the work that we're already doing in committees and do so without slowing down from one year to the next. I think that's really the bulk of what people were interested in. I'll give Director Spurgeon just a quick shout out because when we talked, she highlighted the opportunity that we have to, again, ensure that what we're discussing in committees rolls out to the rest of the board. So that's something that was discussed in October as well. And that's certainly on the governance committee's mind and is part of our work plan for how we can continue to improve that communication going forward. One more thing, and then I'll pause. Process-wise, historically, what would happen is we would vote for officers in January, and then the board chair would then be responsible for bringing a slate of committee members to the board in February for approval. Because we intend to leave everything the same and as is, we intend to bring both in January. So we will approve board officer slate in January and then turn right around and approve committee assignments in January as well. So again, streamlining a little bit, trying to tighten it up, and hopefully go right into 2022 moving quick. Pausing for comments or questions. Okay, that's my 7-second pause. So that's that one. As you can see on the agenda, we did have a conversation pertaining to COVID-19. And more than anything, I want to note that there is in the governance book in Diligent, there's really good information, detailed information in there to take a look at for those of you that are not on the governance committee. You've seen much of the information before, so I would encourage you to go take a look. Some of it is very sensitive, so that's why we're not going to have a discussion today necessarily. I'll say that more than anything, I think that high-level topics that we discussed, one was, what the continued pandemic, what kind of an impact it is having on staff availability, staff in key positions that are important. So that was a consistent topic of conversation. A little bit of a discussion about the district's plans for remote work and what's happening there. Current mask wearing policy for the district, and vaccinations. And again, we're not going to have a conversation about this today, but I guess what I would offer for the board and just for line of sight is that there was pretty clear agreement amongst the committee board members, the four of us, that we really, really want to encourage people to get vaccinated, and if they're eligible for boosters, to get boosters. This is it's really, really important for the district's safety, and it's really, really important for public safety and public health as well. So that was definitely a topic of conversation that we dug into during our COVID-19 update. We appreciated the information from Javier. Mikkel was there to offer some perspective as well. So it was a good conversation, and we appreciated the update. Third, we had a very, very brief discussion with respect to OPPD redistricting. Everything is moving along. There is a hearing scheduled for December 27th, 2021, which is when we expect a conditional approval of the new subdistricts. No reason to think that there's any risk or concern there. Just wanted to provide an update because that is important activity. And then finally, we did have, again, a very brief conversation about the board governance workshop debrief. So those of you that provided Scott comments on the LRI report out from our workshop, thank you. Those changes have been incorporated. The draft minutes are in diligent for your review if you would like to see them. There really, generally speaking, weren't any material changes. So don't worry too much about going in there and giving it another thorough review. It's pretty clear. The next steps is really to take those action items and start to pull them into our board work plan as appropriate. There's some duplication there already, so we're not going to duplicate any further, but it's more than anything really making sure that in addition to having a good conversation in October, we take action as a result of the conversation we had. So that is something that's on my mind as I think about making sure that those actions do continue. That is my governance chair's report. Is there any, I don't see any hands. So if there's anything more, governance committee members, now's the time to hop in. Otherwise, we're going to go on. I see Javier's hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Director Moody. Just a quick clarification. I think it's important for our employees as well who are watching and will be watching the recording. On item number 2, just to confirm that the decisions that I have made for the organization and the plans that we have remain the same. And this was an opportunity for me to share my logic and my thought process, our decision-making process with board members. So nothing changes here. And I think it's important for our employees to hear this. We've been communicating with them for many, many weeks. So it's not a change. It's a communication and sharing the why and the logic behind it with the board.
Yep, that's good, Javier. Thank you for reinforcing that. I apologize if I misstepped in describing that. Yep, that was helpful. Thank you. Other items, topics to discuss? Any clarifications to add? Okay, we are on to the next item on the agenda, which is our annual agenda planning calendar. And Mr. Fernandez, I see your name next to that one as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Director Moody. And I'm going to do this along with Mr. Foch as well. But this is, part of our GP4 agenda planning. We have collaborated with the board and with the executive leadership team just for planning purposes. These are just planning agenda topics that we have for next year. This helps us distribute the work that we have not only for the board but for staff in a good manner. We will have revisions to agendas, of course, because things change and things happen. But it was a good opportunity for us to figure out how are we going to distribute topics that will come to the board during next 2022. These also will be linked to the next item that Mr. Foch will talk about, the calendar that we will ask the board to approve. The calendar piece will be subject to approval. This is a reporting item for me to report back to the board that we have a planning work included in here, not only for the agendas only, but also for the work plan for the board. And these are the matrices that Director Moody, you talked about the LRI work that we did. Well, that's part of this work plan that we have with the board that doesn't necessarily fit within the committee agendas, but work that happens between those committee meetings. I believe that you all have in your packet the work plan for the board, as well as each month's agenda planning, preliminary agenda planning calendar that shows you the types of topics and the times that we have planned for the different months. Scott, anything that I missed?
No, every talking point I had written down you addressed. So thank you. And I would say to this point, this is typically a precursory, hey, we have it and we're living into the policy.
So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to any comment.
All right, thank you, Javier. I don't see any hands raised. Anybody want to chime in, ask a question? Straightforward stuff. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. On to the 2022 board meeting schedule, Mr. Foch.
Great. This also is one of the items that we try to get up front. The reality is our bylaws state that we will provide this, and it would be helpful for us to just go to the meeting schedule. The goal will be to get approval of this, of course, by Thursday's board meeting. It is important to note that while at the beginning of December, this is a perspective of when we think that the meeting dates and times would occur and the location. All dates, times, and locations are subject to change, and all meeting information will be publicly noticed in advance of the meeting. There is consideration of canceling either a June or July meeting, having 11 rather than 12 meetings in the course of the year, and that decision is made later. This highlights that all committee meetings would pretty much adhere to the schedule that we have been adhering to in terms of when it falls during the month. It's acknowledging that the location for these all committee meetings would continue to be WebEx and audio video conference that they have been, and that they would generally start around 10 a.m. with closed session times would be that they would start prior to that. The board meetings are proposed on Thursday, again, following in the same time during the month. The location for those for the coming year, we have reserved space at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center. They do allow us to get into the space at 4 o'clock, which allows us to begin the meeting at 5 o'clock p.m. That is the board meeting schedule that's currently being proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Foch. I see a hand raised from Director Kavanaugh. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, looking at the schedule, I noticed that all of the Tuesday meetings will be scheduled via WebEx. Is there no plans to return to normal for the entire year?
At this point, our assumption would be that this would continue as it has been. To your question, Director Kavanaugh, if there's a determination to be made at some point, that could happen, and it could, affect the rest of the calendar. It could be done on a meeting by meeting basis.
And Director Kavanaugh, that's a great question, and I think just following on this one, the next obvious question could be what happens to board meetings, right? Right now we have them all in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center, but those could also go back to WebEx. So for planning purposes, this is what we have today with the information we have today. But your point is a really good one. Halfway through the year or at some point during the year, we may make changes depending on how the pandemic is going, depending on the needs, space available, etc. We can either start making committee meetings in person, or conversely, we could also make some board meetings virtual. So that is that flexibility that the board will retain going forward, and we will adapt to the conditions that we have next year.
Okay, the other question
That
I
answers
have is,
your question.
okay, the other question I have is, I noticed the September board meeting is scheduled for the 22nd. That's actually the fourth Thursday of the month. Is there a scheduling conflict that month? Is that why it's pushed back?
That that particular month, Labor Day is in the September, and so we find it's oftentimes easiest in terms of administration and pulling everything together to push it back for that particular month.
Okay. So we're also having a meeting on St. Patrick's Day on the 5th.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
We're also having I noticed we're having a board meeting on St. Patrick's Day. That's correct, apparently.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Kavanaugh. Is that, assuming you're good, I see you're muted. Any other questions from other board members? I don't see any other hands. And I will, Director Kavanaugh, to your first question, I'll note that as well, that it's very much on my mind, keeping an eye on opportunities for us to get together in person on our Tuesday meetings. So again, reinforcing what Javier just described in terms of a lot of flexibility and nimbleness as the situation changes around us over the course of next year. Okay, seeing no other hands, that therein concludes the Governance Committee. Back to you, Director Bogner.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have Director Yoder with Finance Committee.
Thank you, Director Bogner. As we all look at the agenda we covered, the Finance Committee covered on December 2nd, you'll see that 3 items are up for action for the board on Thursday. Item 1 and 2, the declaration of anticipated 2022 capital expenditures reimbursement and 2021 expenditure approval increase, were quickly reviewed by the Finance Committee, and the consensus of the committee was to move these items forward for full board explanation today and recommendation for approval on Thursday. The third item, the 2022 final corporate operating plan and the associated 2.5% increase in rates overall, 3.2% increase in residential rates, has the same recommendation from the committee for approval. The full board saw the preliminary COP at our November full committee meeting. Staff outlined at December's pre-committee finance meeting, as they will again today, changes between the preliminary and the final COP, and provided information developed in response to requests by some board members. So because the COP is such an important event, and in order to make the board work related to the COP a little more visible, I want to relate the following. Last month, the board approved a change to SD2. That change removed the 5-year moratorium on rate increases. The increase in rates tied to the 2022 COP is the first increase that 7 out of the 8 board members have been asked to approve since they've been on the board. Some might ask if board members had any questions about the changes in rates. We will be asked to approve on Thursday, and you betcha we did. We asked questions in small group meetings, as well as one-on-one discussions with executive leadership team members. In addition to that information, the board has received several comments about the rate increase from the public, and I know several board members are doing additional work on rate design. I want to offer kudos to the board members who were asking questions and to management and staff alike for taking and making the time to have that dialogue about the budget and rates increase. My thanks goes out to everyone for this effort, and I offer a special recognition to our new CFO, who set down his career plane here at OPPD in the middle of this conversational storm. It wasn't a storm, it was really helpful. And I'm thankful for everybody who participated. In the end, the Finance Committee's perspective is the rate increase is commensurate with the budget increases needed for where OPPD is now and where OPPD needs to be moving forward. to everyone's credit, we all agree to continue the questions and answers about rates, which rates are changed and by how much. That continuing discussion is going to evolve as we continue to work on SD2, that's item 4. A quick reminder for everyone, the Finance Committee has been working on changes in language to SD2 since at least March, as is reflected in the notes on the board work plan. I expect that the Finance Committee will finalize the new goals for SD2 in the first quarter of 2022. And I hope that the recommended changes to the rest of SD2, the principles, will support the newly revised goals and be offered to the board in the July to September timeframe. That's the hope. The second part, the exploration and revision of rate design principles, will necessarily include a look at different schools of thought on rate design. It's part of our duty of care to look at that, in my opinion. There are a lot of ways to slice the pie. Item 5 is where item 4 SD2 change and in item 5 the rate design discussion come together. I've been really encouraged by the conversations I've had with everybody on having that broader understanding of principles. And so I hope that by staying focused on outcomes and on principles, we'll end up with a much better SD2 and at a minimum an improved board understanding of rate design principles. We began that discussion and the discussion is reasonable, sensible, and responsible. So I will leave time for my comments about public comments on rates for Thursday evening. And this concludes my perspective of the Finance Committee actions on December 2nd. Do other Finance Committee members wish to make comments? See some head shakes. Any other board members wish to comment or ask questions? Craig, I see your hand is up.
Yep, I'm just kind of curious, and we don't necessarily need to get into detail today, but I'd kind of like to understand the plans for the 2022 rate design discussion and how they relate to the rate modification work plan, for lack of a better term that I'm just forgetting at this point, that extended for multiple years, 2 or 3 years down the road. How do those two things fit together?
So thanks for that question. I'm going to ask CFO Bishop if he can help me answer that. I'm a little unclear, I guess, what that rate modification work plan, the title that you and I can't remember, that multi-year title is. I've seen a timeline for the next few years that talks about the changes to the block rates and other rate elements. Is that maybe what you're talking about, Craig? Or yeah. So all right. Well, before I misspeak, I'm going to see if CFO Bishop wants to talk about the combination, and then I'm happy to give my perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Director Moody, and that's one that we plan to explore in more detail, getting alignment with what's already been put out from a scheduling perspective as part of our biennial rate process, plus the multi-year work plan that was out there regarding the declining block rates. I think that took us through a 3 to 5 year journey where we looked at different implications relative to technology. Also, a very important part of this process will be available resources. That'll be the piece that we look to resolve and get a path forward in Q1 and present back to the Finance Committee. Again, I'm relatively new and wasn't involved in all of those conversations, so I'm also going to open it up to other folks on the ELT who may have some perspective on that, but tentative discussion would be to explore that path forward in terms of getting alignment on those schedules and bringing a plan back through the Finance Committee up through the board.
If I may, Director Yoder, great explanation, Jeff. I would also offer that last year So this is 2020. Director Bogner and I had many conversations when she was the treasurer and I was the CFO about the need for us to establish a more disciplined approach for rate design changes. Prior to last year, rate design changes happened without necessarily having a lot of planning around them. We made rate design changes when there was an economic and financial need, a customer need, but it was those were not necessarily planned on a long-term horizon, and because of that we established this idea of having a biennial process, whereby it allows us then to have a longer planning horizon for rate changes. It allows the board to have that also in their mind as we're making policy changes, and it allows staff and management to plan resources to dedicate to these rate design changes. As you all know, rate design changes are not something that we can do easily or really quickly, or actually we don't want them to do really quickly. We want to make sure that we study all the consequences of these design changes. So in addition to what Jeff talked about, the content that we are planning for the next few years, I wanted to also provide a little bit of context on the framework, this biennial process. 2021 is the first biennium, right? We consolidated rate designs in 2020 and 2021. This is their first go around these, but the next one should be at the end of 2023 to have that longer term planning horizon. There will be work done in 2022 and 2023, but I wanted to provide that framework, if that is helpful.
Thank you both, actually, for offering your responses there. From where I sit, I think the key is we've got a few elements that are going on. Craig, it's a great question to ask. How do they all fit together? That I think is we're still teasing out. For me, from my perspective, from the board perspective, our responsibility is SD2. SD2 goals need to be revised, and that's going to happen in the first quarter. And then really there's been a great rich discussion with our new CFO and others about how those principles then that ELT and staff understand relate to the principles that the board wants to double down on and highlight and put into SD2. So I think underlying your question is when the board does that, will it disrupt some of that biennial work that's already done? I don't see that happening from the nature of the conversation that we're having. I see a good, rich discussion here. Does that get on, or do you have follow-on questions?
I do not have a follow-up question, and I'm not going to attempt to repeat back what I heard. Thank you for the clarifications. I think to me, the thing that I'll just elevate to the very top is it's kind of a work in progress, right? How it all fits together, right? Which is exactly how it should be. This is complex stuff, and so I appreciate the work that's already been done and what will be done in the next couple months to continue to put that puzzle together. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy for you to ask the same question in the next couple months. Director Williams, I see you have your hand raised.
Great, thanks very much. Kind of following on where we just were, rate updates now and looking forward to additional policies that help us guide rate making in the future. We've talked in the past about technological improvements that will be necessary to enable more forward-looking and modernized rate structures. Is now an appropriate time to ask if there is a more clarified timeline about the enabling technology for rate making? And I specifically want to come back to in 2022 COP, what are we doing to help enable that? So can you tell me, is now a time to ask, do we have a timeline on hardware and software and communications upgrades that will enable future rate making policy to be implemented?
Well, systems chair. That seems like a good systems lens question. I haven't heard of anything from my seat. Can someone answer your question?
There is. I'm going to ask, and a lot of it is preliminary. There is quite a bit of work planned for 2022, and it is part of our corporate operating plan. But I'm going to ask Troy Vai to chime in. I know his team and many others have been working on studying what's necessary in order for us to implement this advanced meter infrastructure technology that I believe that's what you're referring to, Director Williams. So Troy, anything that you would like to contribute, and then if others in the ELTR would want to contribute on the 2022 COP and how this is reflected in that, maybe that's something that John, I don't know, we're planning on covering that at the next topic. So if that's the case, maybe let's hold up to that. But Troy, if you can mention just briefly the work that we've been doing on studying the AMI journey to AMI.
Yeah, it's a pretty large study in nature. We have several individuals from across the organization involved with this, understanding, what is the potential use cases, what are the business cases for the technology in the future, what type of supporting things do we need to have in place from a technological standpoint, from a communication standpoint, things of that nature. So it's a pretty in-depth study if you think about it from that point of view, and we've also got some consultants engaged with the process to make sure that we're thinking about it properly. But as we move forward, we'll start looking at different technology types, different vendors for the technology. How would we go about installing that? What kind of time frame would we see? What are the costs associated with that? And so whenever you start looking at a project that big, there's a lot of planning functions that take place behind the scenes to make sure that you're ready to execute.
So the question I heard from Director Williams, if I can follow up then, is it's large and it's in motion, but probably there won't be information coming back to feed any rate changes for next year's 2023 COP. Is that
That is
correct?
correct. So through the course of 2022, the team is going to work through some of those things that I talked about, types of vendors, technology, implementation plans, things of that nature. And so it'll take most of the year to kind of work through that. And if we were to look at a plan for rollout, it would be a few years from now. This is kind of the early stage of understanding what all needs to be considered and planned for that long-term implementation plan.
So, okay, Director Williams, go ahead.
Appreciate that. And I did see Janice raise her hand. So quick follow-up there. I guess on the reason I ask is that some of the upgrades that are necessary are very long cycle upgrades, I mean, specifically meters. And so I guess I just want to make sure that we are giving appropriate consideration to, even though we might not know the final answer for what is necessary to make those rate changes, are we doing the preliminary things that we know will definitely be necessary? And again, I think that's probably more like a COP question, but because we were talking about rate structure, which relies on those investments, that's the basis of my question is, when we have the opportunity to make a decision about hardware upgrades that we only get to do every 10 or 15 years, are we considering the implications to the rate structures that we are looking toward when we make those upgrades? And I think we've talked about this in the past, so I don't really want to drag it out any further, but I just wanted to clarify the reason why I'm asking it at this time. Thank you.
Director Molhoff.
Thank you. So I guess I get a little anxious when I start hearing about more long-term studies. I mean, this is technology that's being used all across the country. It's used in other utilities in Nebraska. So I guess explain to me why we have to do another long-term study. We've already done, what, an 11-year pilot on a technology that didn't work. And how can we, I mean, how do we move this process along? And so next year, as part of your study, are going to be submitting an RFP? Will we be starting the process of getting vendors on board? How does this move along? I guess is my question.
Yeah, Director Mohov, let me start, and maybe others can chime in. We have certainly learned. There are many lessons learned. Advanced meter infrastructure is a technology that is very helpful, but there are many cases of utilities who made large investments in advanced meter infrastructure that ended up being not the right investments. They had to write off a lot of those investments because they were either not planned correctly or technology adoption was too fast. And so it's not as easy as just buying the meters. We want to make sure that we are being good stewards of our public's money and making sure that we have all the systems that are ready, that are necessary in order for us to put the meters. The meter in and of itself, replacing the meter is not that complicated. It's how the meter is going to communicate back to the organization in a safe, cyber secure manner. What are we going to do with all of the data that is going to be generated by all of these meters? And again, all the transmission of data and connectivity, not only with meters, but with the rest of our system. So that's why it takes time. We're not necessarily studying the benefits of AMI. We're studying how do we best implement it based on the technology that we have at OPPD. I would love to move these as fast as we can, but I also want to make sure that we're doing this in a responsible manner. I certainly do not want to make an investment that proves to be a failed investment because we failed to correctly plan for it. So I get I sense the need for urgency, and we are moving as fast as we can, but at the same time we're doing this in a responsible manner. So others, I don't know if others would like to chime in.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in a little bit. To Troy's comment, there's an ecosystem surrounding this, and to Javier's as well, that requires a certain level of technology from a security perspective and from other systems that need to interface and interact. And it all needs to be built to standards that have to be in place. So what I see the teams are doing, it's a very collaborative approach across many different areas because it impacts many different areas. I think they are gaining their speed in terms of what they're doing. They understand the urgency of the situation and what we're trying to achieve, and bringing in an external party that Troy mentioned that has the expertise. I think that you are referencing, Director Mulhoff. We're not starting from, no one's done this before or anything like that. This has been done and we're trying to learn, so we're not recreating a wheel because we don't need to. But there are different aspects in our environment that we do need to take into account that would be different than another utility because we all have differences and nuances that we need to take into account. So from my perspective, I think you will see they will pick up momentum. It will still stay very thoughtful in terms of that. And what Javier's mentioning about the data is really critical because just to have the data, that only gets us so far. It's got to be digestible in a way that's meaningful to do the different types of things that we're talking about doing. So all that has to layer in as well. And so that's all being taken into account. So I would say that the whole process is being done very thoughtfully, but with, to your point, a sense of urgency to keep moving along. And the collaboration on the team is very high. And I think we're in a really good space at this point from that perspective. I hope that's helpful.
I would say one of the advantages of having the separate lines of the strategic initiatives all happening at the same time is there's a level of planning and integration that's really starting to show up in those discussions. So, like Kate's team is fully engaged with the grid modernization team to understand how all those pieces and parts fit together. That's the first time we've seen that level of collaboration, kind of looking forward, trying to understand what is needed to support these types of transformational changes. So I echo Kate's comments of I'm very optimistic about where this is headed in a way that we're planning appropriately to not hit some of those things that Javier mentioned about not having the type of outcome that we want when we put such a system in place. The meter piece is very easy. It's all the other connectors that are really quite challenging.
Director Mulhoff, if I could offer another perspective, and others, Troy, Kate.
In the middle of a power company meeting here, on the Zoom thing.
Mike, can you mute, please? Thank you. What I'm hearing is a lot of this is how we evaluate technology, and this is how it gets implemented, and it takes time for us to be correct in our decision making. Board members aren't in the weeds on technology, and we don't provide technology solutions, but we do have the tool of policy making. It is possible, I'm not advocating for it right now, I think it's just in the mix of the discussion on rate design, for us to use proxy information to establish like a three-part rate over at what LES has. So I think the urgency you're hearing is, I would caution against waiting until we get it perfect and until the AMI. I think there is a case to be made for using the information we have and creatively finding an interim solution. So not, I guess I sound like I'm advocating, but it should at least be on the table for discussion as we move forward here through the principles and talk about rates. Well, we've been long on this, unless there are other comments from board members. We've gone long on the directors or on the chair report. So if we could move on, handing things off to CFO Bishop for the next three items on our agenda.
Thank you, Director Yoder. We're going to first talk about the 2021 expenditure approval increase, and I'm going to pass it to John Thurber to walk us through that.
Thank you, CFO Bishop. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you. Yes, we're asking for authorization from the board to increase our expenditure limit for 2021. And as the board remembers, in September, we asked for an increase from the board from our original 2021 COP expenditure limit. And that was really tied to two major items, the impact of the polar vortex on expenses, and then also the July storm. And we built in some contingency for that, but at that time we were evaluating the possible use of the decommissioning and benefit reserve account, but we hadn't finalized that decision at that point. Well, we would, and we are planning to make a $95 million transfer from the decommissioning and benefits reserve account. We did discuss this with the board last month as part of the COP plan. We have right now currently $115 million sitting in the decommissioning and benefits reserve. We'd like to use $95 million of the $115 million to move to our retirement plan, our pension plan, by the end of the year. We went through a pretty involved process of looking at a model of the decommissioning risks. And we feel that we can move $95 million and still cover existing decommissioning risks that we have over the next 3 to 4 years through the decommissioning process, and still have those risks mitigated by the $20 million that we have remaining. So the movement of $95 million would cause our expenditure limit to be exceeded. And in doing so, we are asking the board to increase our expenditure limit to $1,772 million approximately. So by doing so, this is not going to negatively impact our debt service coverage ratio. In fact, there might be a positive impact as a result of this, because we're actually taking revenues that we had saved away in the past and reduced our debt service coverage ratio and moving those revenues back into revenues for 2021. And so this does have a small positive impact on our debt service coverage ratio. If we can go to the next slide, please, Mo. You can see originally we had asked for a limit of expenditures of about $1.443 billion. That was in the original corporate operating plan that was approved last December. In September, we asked for an increase of $1.738 billion. And this, what we're asking for now is $1.771 billion. And you can see the variables that have taken place. And obviously the big one is the non-fuel operations and maintenance expense variable. That has increased, and that's the result of the $95 million transfer out of the decommissioning benefits reserve to the retirement plan. We're not asking for a total increase because we believe our capital expenditures are going to be coming under the original budget. That's really a timing issue, and we're reducing the amount of contingency that we're holding at year end. So the actual increase in the amount is about a little under $34 million. So that is what we're asking the board to authorize, an increase in expenditures limit for 2021, really driven by the $95 million, what I would call voluntary expenditure that we're making out of the decommissioning and benefits reserve into our retirement plan. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Excellent presentation, Mr. Thurber. Thank you very much. Any questions by members of the board? I see Director Bogner has a hand raised.
Yeah, so I just want to make a comment and then I have a question. I want to make it clear for the public that the decommissioning and benefits reserve account is something that we've been contributing money to for several years to hedge any unexpected event at Fort Calhoun as we decommission that plant, with the intention then when we get to a point, this is the point, where we are comfortable with the remaining work that needs to be done, that money moves into the pension. So it only could be used for decommissioning, Fort Calhoun, or retirement monies. So I want to make that like explicitly clear here. I have a question. I am under the impression that the contribution to the pension would be over and above our actuarial obligation. So can you confirm that for me, Mr. Thurber?
Yes, Director Wagner, that is correct. We'll be making a $56 million contribution to the pension plan, and this would be above that contribution.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great points, Director Bogner. Anyone else? I don't see a hand. If you got one raised, speak up. Okay. Next topic.
The next topic is a very large topic, and that is to present our final corporate operating plan and projected rate increases that are needed to meet the expenses for our corporate operating plan. Wanted to really provide the directors an update on what we submitted and actually went through in pretty good detail in November as far as our preliminary corporate operating plan. And really there are only two, what I would say, very minor changes from the final plan that is out available that the public has had a chance to review. And the preliminary plan that we sent out to the public in November. And that is really just reflecting in our 2021 comparison data, one additional month of actuals in those projections. We added October actuals to the projected 2021 projections. That led to very minor changes in our 2021 amounts. And those are just used for comparison purposes, comparing where we are under the 2022 budget to 2021 projected actuals. That's one item. The other item was the retail revenues and the proposed rate action we had as a single lump sum of about $26 million. We have now broken those down into the corresponding customer classes. And so when you look at the required revenues by customer class, you'll now see that the revenues reflect the approximately $26 million of rate increases. So that is really the only changes that we've made from the preliminary information preliminary corporate operating plan that we submitted in November and the final one that we are submitting and have submitted in December. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I hope, I know Director Williams asked a question about our investments going forward. And obviously the big, you'll see our strategic initiatives, the 5 strategic initiatives. The corporate operating plan does make significant investments in those initiatives. And the biggest one you'll see is with our business technology platform. That's about $1.6 million of investments that's taking place under business technology platform. And we'll get into this a little later, but really those are one of the drivers that we're asking the board to consider as far as a rate increase. And that's really the beginning, as we talked about, to make sure that we're prepared in the future for the investments we need to make with the grid modernization and the advanced metering infrastructure initiative that we have here over the next few years. We talked about, and I mentioned this in the past, and I truly believe this is kind of our foundational investments going forward in these initiatives. And these 5 initiatives, most of them will transition when we move into the Powering the Future to 2050. We have 6 visions of where the company is going forward, and these initiatives will really move into those and visions going forward, and will provide a down payment for the visions of where we believe the company needs to move to 2050. So this is really a great, what I would consider down payment and foundational investment. We've certainly invested some of these initiatives previously, but for the big ones, specifically the business technology platform in particular, this is really what I would say is the first major investment in that initiative going forward, and we will be making investments going forward in 23 and beyond. So if we can move to the next slide, please. As we talked about, we did submit to the board for review a proposed rate action of an average of 2.5% amongst all customer classes. And we are not, after further discussion with individual board members, also meeting individual board members with our rate consultant, we are continuing to move forward with what we had proposed in November, which is rate increases amongst the 5 customer classes that you see there. 3.2% for residential, 0.9 for commercial, 3.2 for industrial, 2.5 for lighting, and no rate increase for wholesale customers. And this is really tied to a cost of service study that we prepared on what are the required revenues from each one of our customer classes, and how best can we recover those revenues through the rates that we have in place and the rate increase that we're proposing. And so based on the cost of service study and in discussion with our rate consultant, the Brattle Group, we're proposing this for board consideration. I know we've had a lot of detailed discussions with board members about this and about some of the specifics amongst all the customer changes that we're proposing, but we feel comfortable moving forward with the proposed rate increases, and certainly want to make sure that we answer any questions about these today if there are any additional questions. But also wanted to point out too that in addition to the rate increase that we're proposing, we're also making and requesting the board approve a change in our FPPA adjustment. If you remember, that is for fuel and purchase power that the district incurs each year. It's an automatic adjustment that would take place. And what we've seen over the last few years, in particular in this year with the polar vortex, is that when you don't look at off-system sales into this calculation, it can really skew and make this a very volatile calculation going forward. And so our proposal is to include the off-system sales into this calculation. So it's not just purchase power that the district sells off system, but it's also the revenue that the district gets off system from its sales. And we believe that that will help mitigate wide swings in the FPPA going forward. So that's the other rate action that we're proposing for board consideration here on Thursday. Given this, I'd be happy to answer any questions about this. I know we've had a long discussion. If any of the board members have any questions.
Thank you once again, Mr. Thurber. Excellent presentation. Looking for hands. I think I already gave my views on this and stated that the Finance Committee is supportive of this, moving it forward for positive action.
And
Oh,
Director Yoder?
yeah, you're not. Yeah, I understand.
This is not the end. I do want to talk also about what's driving the rate increase, and that really is covered in the next slide.
Thank you for the pause.
And as we mentioned earlier, what the district has done over the last 5 years is really try to maintain the district and maintain the ability to provide power to our customers without making major investments in the future of the organization. And this is really the first time that we're looking at what I would call strategic transformative investments in the organization. And that's really being driven, what I would say, by three major areas. And that would be, and the biggest one is actually our technology investments. It became obvious, as Javier had said earlier, that we need to make technology investments in the organization going forward. And this includes both capital and additional personnel needed to support where the organization is moving forward, and making sure that we are able to provide the rates and the rate structure for the organization going forward in a future state. And so this is really our down payment and really foundational investment in that. In addition to that, energy delivery needs to begin in the investments of where do we go? Do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right modeling in place? So that we can properly utilize the business technology aspects to gather the information, make the investments in the actual facilities needed to better engage with the customers directly through our metering systems. We are also making significant investments in tree trimming. I think the July storm pointed to the fact that we need to look at that very seriously going forward. Obviously, we're going to be looking at the possibility of strong winds tomorrow. And so it just reinforces the need to make sure that our distribution system is reliable and that we don't have trees interfering with that. And so we have the largest vegetation management tree trimming budget in our history in 2022. We're also making investments in customer service. Obviously, I think you've heard, we're looking at investments in a new pilot program under our energy burden solutions program. And so we are making investments there. And then we have significant planned outages with our fossil fuel plants. We need to begin those transitions, especially in North Omaha, to natural gas firing. And so we're beginning to plan for those under planned outages in 2022. So those are really the drivers of what's causing the rate increase here in 2022.
And if I may, Director Yoder and John, one thing that I would like to mention here is also that the vegetation management, tree trimming is one that I would like to highlight here. One that I am very proud of what the organization has done in terms of funding, and not only funding with monetary resources, but also sourcing the work, right? And in the past few years, we have seen a doubling of the monies that we used to spend on tree trimming, 5 years ago to today. It's almost double what we used to spend 5 years ago. These would put it at an even higher level. And so what the team has been doing on tree trimming and vegetation management is not only putting in more monetary resources, but really studying the different circuits within our service territory and trees and cycles for trimming trees. So we're adding more resources, but also we're adding them in a smarter way. We know exactly where we need to focus on to shorten the cycles for trimming trees. So very excited about this piece of the budget. I don't know if Troy, if you have anything to share there on tree trimming.
I think you did a great job, Javier. You know, as part of this process too, we're starting to capture what type of vegetation's on different circuits. Because as we know, certain types grow faster, quicker than others. And so we're really looking at it from that targeted approach. And so super excited to see where we're headed with this. I think the other additional thing that I've heard a lot of conversations about when out in the field with the arborist was, in Omaha, you're starting to see some aging tree canopy in certain parts where, the trees have been around for a long time. And so that's another reason for needing to understand what the extent of condition is and, focusing on that with kind of a surgical technique to make sure that we're hitting those particular areas. If you think about this last summer, some of the hardest hit locations in Omaha, we've kind of rearranged some of our schedule a little bit in some cases and added additional resources to focus on some of those because of that aging canopy.
Thank you. Thank you for the additional context, Javier. We can go to the next slide, please. We did have an independent review done of both the corporate operating plan and the rate action by the Brattle Group. And the Brattle Group is basically concurring with what we're proposing for the board. And their quote is, "The expenditures anticipated by the district are reasonable, of the type that a utility following prudent utility practices would expect." And then as far as the rate action, we find the proposed rate changes to be fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. And that's really important for us because we have state statutes in place that basically require our rates to be fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So what we're proposing in the opinion of the Brattle Group is that we're meeting our state statute requirements regarding the rate action. We have made some significant reductions in cost over the last few years, and I do want to share that information with the board. First off, in an area that I'm very familiar with, we have refunded debt. And so if we can go to the next slides, well, and I'm sorry, I do want to mention the corporate operating plan that we feel that this advances our mission of providing affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive energy services to our customer owners. So we feel that what we're proposing here under the corporate operating plan does advance our SD1 mission of really moving the organization forward and doing what we need to about the affordability, reliability, and environmentally sensitive services we provide our customers. I would like to get to what we've done over the last few years to try to mitigate cost impacts, negative cost impacts to our customers. And as I started, we have significantly reduced the amount of costs that we have under our debt service. Since 2016, with our senior lien bonds, we've had 4 transactions that have saved about $82 million in debt service costs. And then when you add our subordinated transactions, those include replacing some longer term debt with commercial paper in 2019 and 2020, you add another $41 million on top of that, or over $120 million of debt service savings in the last 5 years. And those can obviously change, and we'll continue to look for debt service savings as we issue debt going forward. Obviously, there's going to be debt issuances going forward in 2022 and 2023, and we'll continue to look at ways of trying to mitigate the impact of the bond issues going forward. But beyond that, the district has also instigated cost-saving programs. We call it a continuous improvement culture. And I'm going to ask Vice President Foch to kind of talk about that process that we've had.
Mr. Thurber, thank you very much. I'm really proud of the continuous improvement culture here at OPPD. In fact, as I look at the participants, people that are joining this call today, many of the executive leadership team members, many of the employees have all been engaged in one form or another in the continuous improvement effort, really in service to the district and with a clear understanding that we are financial stewards. And as we deliver the mission, it is important for us to take that stewardship seriously, and we do. Over the years, OPPD has cultivated a culture of continuous improvement, and I will say in 2015, there was a significant shot in the arm bringing external consultants in, and between 2015 and 2018, these efforts generated about $58 million in financial value, a series of O&M reductions, cost savings, net margin, and capital savings. We estimate about $40,000 of man hours of freed capacity, and around 340 initiatives were completed during this time. We had a leadership change in 2018 where I had the honor and privilege of overseeing the function broadly. And during the last 3 years, continuous improvement has helped initiate approximately 340 completed projects, provided organizational efficiency gains of about 46,000 person hours and approximately $12 million of value generated for the district. We all take this very, very seriously. And one example that was really, I thought, quite impressive was in rural reliability. And that was projected savings of around $1 million. And that was really by getting people to take a look at whether or not we needed to invest in capital or if we could use kind of existing infrastructure that was out there and make a determination. And this is just meant to be an illustrative example of one of the many things, one of the many 340 completed projects during this time. I do see Director Mulhoff has her hand raised. I don't know if it was around this or if there was another question. All right.
I'm sorry, Director Mulhoff. Thank you, Scott, for calling it out.
This isn't, I want to commend you all for this continuous improvement culture. I think it's great. My question wasn't about that. My question was that when we were considering these rate changes, how do we decide if they go into the rate or if they go into the customer charge or that minimum bill rule that I have to pay the extra $2 and something cents a month because I'm on a certain rate? How do you, and Scott, I'm sorry I interrupted your presentation, but I really would like to know at what point do we keep just changing rates, or do we look at either decreasing or increasing that customer charge? Because some of these things on the list aren't really directly related to energy production or transmission and distribution. So how do we decide that, and what at what point would we consider looking at that fixed charge that we have? So yeah, sorry to derail your
well, so let's not derail it. Let's because that was the last slide as I understand it. Let's give the big finish and then come right back to your question, Director Mulhoff. It's a good question, and it could have come up earlier in the presentation when we talked about rates, could have come up earlier during my earlier report. So it's a good question. Let's do the big finish.
Director Yoder, thank you. And Director Mulhoff, I appreciate the sensitivity. I should have acknowledged I am complete with this slide. So John, I don't know if you had any concluding comments or if we want to.
My only concluding comments is that, thank you, thank you, Vice President Foch. My only concluding comments is that we appreciate the time and effort, and we understand the importance of what we're asking the board to do to raise rates. We do feel it's a great investment in the future of our organization. Really, the rate increase is targeted to to future investments in this organization that honestly we haven't been able to make over the last 5 years under the pledge of not raising rates. And so we appreciate your consideration and the great questions that you've asked about the process that we've gone through, the COP process, the rate change process. And we understand the importance of what we're asking for you, but we are asking for the board to approve the corporate operating plan, the final corporate operating plan on Thursday, and the proposed rate action that goes along with that plan. So I'll take a stab at Director Mohoff's question, but I'll certainly anyone else can take a stab at that also. And as far as the customer charge, the fixed customer charge, this really kind of falls under the rate design aspects of this. And when we get the infrastructure in place, when we can really delve into three-part rates in the future. And, this was tied back to an earlier conversation we had months ago about block rates and that. I think we'll really evaluate customer charges at that point and what appropriate level there is for customer charges of that type or a fixed charge versus variable charge. So I believe that that'll be done once we get the infrastructure in place and really to get more and more detailed information on that. So I don't know if anyone else would like to chime in, Brad Underwood or Javier.
Any takers there?
Yeah, I was just going to add great explanation, John. And as a process step, when the rates are set, we set them using the FERC standard chart of accounts. And the service charge, as a reminder, is an incomplete recovery of the customer and distribution costs. So no change to the service charge. I think the blocks disposition that we did, I think a couple months ago, identified the need to look at this as Mr. Thurber had recapped, and my understanding is that'll continue in the first quarter of next year.
Director Yoder, we did get a chance to hear from Brad. I did want to call him out and raise the thanks for him in terms of all the effort he's done prior to his transition into his new role. Did a fantastic job in the FP&A role, and then ultimately leading the group. We've got Brad Sire leading that effort now, and also Beth Boyle with the rates team. Again, a ton of work, not only building up over the past 3 quarters in terms of developing the COP, a lot of good questions that came out naturally, as you'd highlighted. We had the first rate increase in 5 years, so naturally questions are going to be raised. I think we had a really robust set of discussions around those, and we'll be talking more about rate design here in Q1. But did want to really thank the team that was pulling that together, but also the broader district. It's every cost center gets engaged. It is fully involved in the budgeting process, and so this would not happen if it wasn't for the collective effort across the district. And I think it's important to call out all the contributions that happen district-wide to get this to where it's at today.
Very good, CFO Bishop. Director Mohoff, do you have a follow-up? Did you get your question answered? I'm not seeing, I can't see it right now. So if you're shaking your head, I can't hear it. All right, very good. So I do just, everybody's done a great job on putting this together. And like I said, the Finance Committee is recommending it be approved. I specifically want to thank the team for putting together for recognizing that this comes off on the heels of a 5-year no rate increase. And therefore, if we had wanted to spend some money, we couldn't, because we would have had to raise the rates. So that delay has pushed off some of the need to increase the budget. I specifically like the rate drivers slide, and And I appreciate the explanation that there have been savings. This isn't just adding cost on top of cost. So there have been savings, and I appreciate the changing culture that Mr. Foch alluded to. So just saying all of that, any board members want to talk about the COP before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Oh, wait, I think I see a hand. There, Ms. Spurgeon.
Thank you, Director Yoder. I was asked a couple of weeks ago by a friend, well, you've been on the board almost a year now. Have you learned anything? And so I just kind of would like to share a little bit of what I've learned in the context of talking about this corporate operating plan. Well, I've learned that public utilities are basically governed by Nebraska state law, and that requires public utilities to be run like a business. So we have to charge for the services that are rendered and then recover those costs. And the law also says that we have to be affordable and reliable and spread the costs in a non-discriminatory manner, as was highlighted earlier today. I've also learned that electricity as a natural element requires a lot of herding and care in order for it to be useful for human beings. And so those regulatory agencies that have been named, NERC and FERC, have really important things to say about what happens with that. Also have learned that the Southwest Power Pool, SPP, has been a very helpful partner in keeping OPPD, helping it to deliver reliable services and to remain financially sound, and that continues to be true. I also have learned that we have some really smart money managers at Omaha Public Power District, and they have saved us a lot of money by their knowledge and their skill. I've also learned that everybody that I have met personally or been introduced to care a great deal about delivering reliable and affordable electrical service to all of OPPD's constituents. And we have people who I think on the outside who think, oh, you don't really care about reliability. You have no idea how many people on the inside of OPPD care deeply about reliability. That's a huge thing for us. We don't want to have to say that, oh, one out of every 3 customers of OPPD has reliable services. No, that's decades ago. We want to say that everyone has reliable service. So what I want to convey is that I have learned that there are people of super ability and abundant intelligence and great perspective and abundant goodwill working for the Omaha Public Power District. And I can say the same thing about the board of directors that I've had the pleasure of working with for a year. So I just want to reassure the public, I guess, this is my word of good tidings, of goodwill and good news, that we know that we are entering into 2022 with a lot of things unknown. We don't know what the weather is going to bring to OPPD tomorrow, but everyone has made their best efforts to create a foundation in this corporate operating plan for us to move forward with confidence and with the best vision that we have for being able to cope with whatever the fates throw at us, and to be able to build on the vision that we have for the organization. Thanks for letting me say that.
Thank you, Director Spurgeon. Well said. Director Williams?
Yeah, thanks very much. I know we've talked about this a lot. I had several questions last month at the preliminary presentation, but just to be clear, I support the Finance Committee recommendation that we need to make additional investments to prepare our utility for the future. I also support the description of the breakdown of the way that we will ask our customers to contribute toward those investments through the different rate classes and the increases in those rates. So thanks very much to the Finance Committee for the work that you put into along with staff into the presentation last month and the updates that we have this month. Again, I appreciate everything you've done, and looking forward to seeing the approval and moving forward with all the investments that we've outlined. Thanks.
Terrific, Director Williams. I'm not seeing any other hands. Director Spurgeon, you're okay? All right. With that, I'm sure there will be comments on Thursday as well, because this is, of course, whenever there's a rate change, people want to know what their representatives are thinking.
Yoder, I think Director Moody has a comment.
Well, I thank you for that, because I didn't see it.
All right. Rick, thank you for managing all this, by the way. This is you're doing a wonderful job leading this committee, and I appreciate the way you're reporting out today. So thank you to you. Yeah, we'll to your point, we'll talk on Thursday a little bit more, but I just wanted to say two things. One is, again, I wanted to express gratitude to all those involved in the hard work of putting this together, and the board members for really meaningfully engaging and asking really, really great questions. I've appreciated the dynamic and the questions were, to Director Spurgeon's point, the level of commitment within this organization and within this board about doing what's right, taking care of our customer owners, and aligning with our mission is really, truly impressive. The only thing that I'll add is that over the course of my 5 years on the board, it's not been uncommon for the board to express a desire for a direction, for something to occur, for us to lean into action, perhaps in a swifter way, and then backed up those statements and those desires with, hey, if budget is a restraint, let's talk about it. So in many ways, I see, and Mr. Thurber pointed this out, I think, really articulately, which is to say we're starting to invest in the future of this utility, and in fact, he connected it to the powering the future for 2050 work, which I really appreciated. So, you know, this is not easy. This is not something that I think any of us take lightly. It will impact people financially. There's no doubt about it. But these are investments in the utility of the future, and I appreciate the fact that we've gone through it so deliberately and have really mapped out what makes sense and where we need to go. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Director Moody. Always appreciate your comments on these things. Okay, in case I'm missing a hand that's up, shout out if you're needing to say something. All right, thank you, board colleagues. Let's, CFO Bishop, go on to the last item for the Finance Committee.
Yeah, we've got one last item, declaration of anticipated 2022 capital expenditure reimbursement. John Thurber will walk us through that. It's a fairly perfunctory requirement from a legal perspective. We'll be able to get through it quickly to keep us on schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Bishop. The last item for me to talk about today is what I call a routine item that we do every December. When you issue tax-exempt debt, there are restrictions on the rate that you can earn on the proceeds when you finance new construction in the future. What the district has typically done to avoid any restrictions on the investment yield is we use our cash and pay for capital expenditures, and then we issue debt to reimburse our cash. And so what this resolution is allowing us to do in 2022 is to reimburse the district for $670 million of capital expenditures when we use our cash to finance them initially. This is a kind of a routine resolution. It's required by IRS restrictions tied to tax-exempt debt. We've done this for, I believe, over 10 years now, where we asked the board to give us this express authorization to reimburse capital expenditures with tax exempt debt. And like I said, it really avoids us having to meet yield restrictions on investments when we finance future capital projects with tax exempt bond proceeds. So this is a routine item. You'll see 670 million is our level of capital improvements for 2022. And we're just asking the board to allow us to reimburse our cash levels with tax exempt bonds. And by doing so, this meets IRS guidelines. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thurber. Any questions? Again, this is a routine item that we've seen, that board members have seen in previous years. And it does, as the other two action items, have the consensus from the Finance Committee for a recommendation for approval on Thursday evening. No other comments? All righty. The Finance Committee report is complete. Chair Bogner.
All right, thank you very much, Director Yoder. At this time, we will go ahead and break for lunch. It's 11:33. Let's just come back at noon and return to our conversation. Thank you. I have noon, so we'll get started again. Director Williams, you're next up with Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight Committee.
Great, thanks very much. We can see on the slide here on the screen that we had a pre-committee meeting on December 1st, and I wanted to talk through a couple of the points that we highlighted in that meeting, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, because there are a lot of resource planning and related activities occurring right now. And so we took the opportunity at the pre-meeting to kind of look for some additional information about those topics and how they relate to each other. A lot of this information has been discussed publicly, specifically in the workshops related to decarbonization. But I wanted to just make sure that directors all were on the same page and had access to the information. And if you had any thoughts that would help inform the Systems Committee as we move forward, I wanted to make sure and get that information from you as well. So the first item on our pre-meeting was related to decarbonization, the way in which we understand net zero and what is or is not included in the methodology for the definition of net zero. And the point that was highlighted again in the energy modeling workshop that I wanted to make sure we are clear about is that accounting of credits for renewable energy generation, which is then exchanged to and from SPP or other utilities, is included in the way in which we define net zero. And that had been presented previously in decarbonization workshops, and I believe during board meeting presentations in the past as well. But just making sure that we are all on the same page about the definition of what is or is not included in net zero was something we discussed in the committee. And so I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or comments on that. I'll try and watch for hand raises and listen for people. But the balancing of our resources through the SPP and accounting for credits of renewable, which would be counted against other fossil or carbon emitting generation, that is included in the net zero methodology. Secondly, we talked about the decarbonization of work streams. There was a public presentation on Thursday evening, December 9th. That was workshop number 6 related to the energy portfolio modeling, the final results. That is one of the 4 work streams that is currently ongoing and that is expected to conclude in the 4th quarter of 2021 or the 1st quarter of 2022. And these are all related together. And I know we talked a little bit last month about the way in which that information is presented to the public and the way it's presented to the board for our input, and the way it influences other discussions and other policy actions that will be ongoing in the future, specifically related to the IRP, that will be due at the end of February 2022. So those four decarbonization work streams, again, it's the energy portfolio on which the workshop was presented to the public on December 9th, the customer, community, and internal operations work streams. And so just making sure that we're all still on board about the different areas where things are progressing. I don't know if anybody had any thoughts or comments about the timeline on that information. Again, feel free to voice those. I just want to make sure that as the systems committee is moving forward and planning our discussions on SD9, SD4, SD7, that we take into account any comments that we hear from anyone else. I do see a hand from Director Yoder. Did you have thoughts on the decarbonization work streams?
Director Yoder, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I just made some, whoops, echo. All right. I just made some notes in Diligent on your agenda. I do appreciate that you're bringing to the fore a net zero logic questions. I guess my question is about the decarbonization initiative overall. What's the board's role? I'm unclear on what the board's role is relative to what's happening here. So, I mean, if I were to have comments here, what would be the impact of it?
Yeah, I apologize, Rick. In the chair report section here, I just want to make sure that the things that we have discussed internally as 4 members of the board, that we hear any thoughts and comments that other members of the board might have. So I'm not expecting anything specific other than if you reviewed some of the information which was provided to the other board members who were not at the systems pre-meeting, and you had any thoughts or comments, if you had any questions about the way in which we are defining the net zero, the logic of the net zero accounting, feel free to share that. I just wanted to make sure that since there is not an action item specifically, and there's not another specific discussion forum, that as we look forward, if you had any thoughts about the information, that we make sure and include that, because as far as board action moving forward, there will be policy discussions on, again, SD9, SD4, and SD7. And so those will start in the systems committee and then probably come to the whole board for input and public comment as well. But leading into those policy discussions, if any of the information that has been presented either in the modeling workshops or that was presented to the board through diligence leads you to any thoughts or comments about the way in which the systems committee will have discussions, I just wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity for you to express those thoughts and opinions.
Thank you very much. Okay, that helps clarify for me. So yeah, I have some questions about the net zero logic versus a zero carbon alternative. I guess my comment is that a net zero logic, having been a watcher of programs similar to that require a good deal of rigorous accounting and making sure that there's not double counting, is something that if we're going that path, we are sure those resources and those systems are in place if we are going to pursue that net zero logic versus a zero carbon logic. I also have, I'm troubled. I guess I haven't quite, I'm not at peace with in this decarbonization reporting out the continued reference of the H2 being a zero carbon technology. It's not in a net zero column. It's in the zero carbon column as not having any carbon. And when I was at the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, the NREL Laboratory Program Manager for Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Technologies pretty much said in response to my question that that for the foreseeable future, and what is that, 10, 20 years out? I don't know, but the foreseeable future, due to the hydrogen embrittlement problems with the steel infrastructure, hydrogen will always be a blended with methane energy source. It won't be a pure H2 even though it's treated in the decarbonization studies as a zero carbon. So that's something that I'm just continue to struggle with, and I hope your systems committee looks at that as we're looking at things. The other thing, I do have a question about the Independent Decarbonization Overview Committee. Yep, I see your hand up.
Yep, sorry, there is bullet point number 3 on the agenda, and I think we'll come to that in a second.
Okay, well then, all right, that's it then. That's all I have to say.
Great, thank you. And I see a hand from Director Moody as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll back up a little bit to Rick's first question, which is I think a process question, and I guess I'd still appreciate some line of sight into will the board get a report out on the decarbonization pathways study results? I know that those were public on December 9th. I think many of the board, my colleagues attended that, but what's next? Is there something planned? Are we going to get a debrief? Perhaps that's in the annual agenda and I missed it, but I'd be curious to understand how this is fitting together.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And that's kind of specifically why I wanted to have this discussion here. Can someone from staff highlight the expected timeline for board presentations / discussion? I know this is something we did talk about in the pre-committee meeting, but yeah, it looks like maybe Brad.
Yeah, thank you, Director Williams. We did have some good discussion in Systems Committee, kind of to collect initial feedback on, for those 4 members, how they would like to receive the report out. And we had a discussion around the volume of the 4 work streams, and that may be too much for one setting to have what I would sort of characterize as a high quality conversation on the 4 work streams. So we took that feedback from Systems Committee. We also took feedback that some of the board members would like an individual review of the outcomes of the 4 work streams, and so we're working to coordinate that. But as of today, the way we're currently postured is we would probably bring back work stream conclusions 2 at a time, so as not to overwhelm the discussion with the totality of the 4 work streams. And at the end of I'll say the second evolution of the 2 work streams, there would be a review around the integrated nature of how we're operationalizing the outcomes of all of the efforts. So it was a little bit of a spectrum. Some wanted individual discussion, some didn't have a preference. And so we're going to kind of continue to work through that, but we'll get that scheduled for Q1. And I believe that's consistent with how we had forecasted the culmination of the decarbonization work stream. So if you'd like an individual conversation, we'd love to support that. Otherwise, we'll probably bring the work stream back in pairs for 2 total evolutions, pending additional feedback.
Greg, I do see your hand. Does that address your question? Great. Yeah, and this is, again, specifically why I wanted to make sure and talk with the other board members who are not on the Systems Committee, because it is a huge amount of information. There have been some public-facing presentations so far, but we are working to come up with a timeline for the presentations and discussion with the board. And Q1 is the expected timeline for that. So thank you, Brad, for clarifying that. Rick, you did have a specific point. I want to make sure I didn't gloss over it here. You asked about the difference between net zero and zero carbon. That was included in workshop 6 under the energy modeling. And I feel like that points in the direction of what we've discussed related to a potential update to SD7 about interim metrics related to decarbonization, or kind of how we define, more clearly define the parameters on that metric. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That was part of the workshop 6 presentation, and I expect we will have more discussion about that as we get into, as Brad just said, the presentation for the board of the conclusion of the of each of the work streams, or in the pairs of work streams in Q1. So thank you for bringing that up, Rick, and we'll make sure and incorporate that into our discussions at the Systems Committee as we move forward. Next on the agenda here was, as Rick alluded to, the decarbonization, the Independent Decarbonization Overview Committee, or IDOC, IDOC. We haven't really had a verbalization of how we want to say that yet, but this is modeled on the Nuclear Decommissioning Oversight Committee. And there have been quarterly exit meetings when the nuclear review has occurred, and that information has been presented to the Systems Committee and then made available to other members of the board if members of the Systems Committee were not available or did not desire to attend that nuclear dock exit meeting. And so there are 3 members of the IDOC, and there was information provided to the board through diligence about the background for each of those members. If you have questions, I think you can refer to their background and their experience and what they bring to the external overview of the work that's been done through the Decarbonization Strategic Initiative. I guess I did want to make sure and ask other members who are not on the Systems Committee about your thoughts for the presentation of that information. It's expected that the external review will be presented to CEO Fernandez and made available to the board. We discussed whether or not there would be an IDOC presentation, possibly at the Systems Committee or possibly in another format. And so do any board members not on the Systems Committee have any thoughts about the way in which that information is presented to the board and the way in which we review or engage with the information from that external review group who's providing their expertise to our strategic initiatives? I see a hand from Director Yoder.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for explaining the process and pointing out that it was built in parallel with the existing nuclear IDOC. And to me, I mean, the question just presents itself based on that observation. I would hope that board members have the opportunity to sit in a verbal report out from the IDOC to staff and the board. That's how we see it at the nuclear, and is that being considered, or is it only a written report that this must be an update because the previous reference to the written report was in a diligent Q&A where I saw that it would just be a written report to the CEO. So now I understand that it's both to the CEO and to board members. But so there are kind of 2 questions in there.
Rick, I appreciate that. That is specifically the discussion we had in the systems pre-meeting as to whether or not there would be an available presentation to the board and what that format might be. It sounds like you would like to have an opportunity to hear from the IDOC members. And I guess, do you have thoughts about whether that is a 4 board member presentation or an all board presentation? I guess the coordination of that is somewhat challenging because of the schedules and based on the caliber and the expertise of the people who are on the committee. It can be challenging to coordinate everyone together at the same time. So do you have thoughts about your preference on how that information is presented?
So I hadn't considered it before now. My immediate reaction is, given that it is hard for to get all of us together and the quorum issues, I think I would balance that with the fact that the discussion might get into the decarbonization means we change our generation, and so that would get into some information that would allow us to go into private session, so or closed session. So I think if the agenda and the topics go to that area, then perhaps a closed session is the way to handle it. If not, I do appreciate that that only 4 and that we use the protocol that we have now. Systems Committee members get first choice.
So CEO Fernandez, do you have comments about this? Because the description of the reporting process has been to you. So do you have thoughts about the discussion we're having here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had a great conversation. I just want to remind everyone, this Independent Decarbonization Oversight Committee is a part of the Decarbonization Strategic Initiative. And those strategic initiatives are launched by me, right, by staff. This is clearly in response to the Strategic Directive 7 that we have, and we're aligned. But I think it's important to pause here and say that or my predecessor in this case, we launched the strategic initiative of pathways to decarbonization. So that's the reason why this independent decarbonization committee reports to me. So I would love to have board members involved, and we will figure out a way to get the board involved and have this report out to the board. I think Director Yoder makes a really good point that we have a similar model with the independent nuclear decommissioning committee. So to the extent that we can make these available to board members and have an interactive session would be fantastic. I will take that as an action item, work with the team, and figure out what the best venues are for us to share this information with the board. So, but I just wanted to call out that point of difference, that you know, how this is structured and how the report is being reported to me, and I will share obviously with the board. I hope this helps.
Thank you, Javier. And I guess, Craig, did you have any thoughts there in response?
No, I would just echo everything. I think this is, I mean, honestly, this feels logistical in nature, and let's just figure out how we can ensure that all board members have line of sight into it.
Appreciate that. Thank you for the input from both of you who are not on the systems committee. And I think this is a discussion we had, and we were trying to determine what that will look like. And so the systems committee will work with Brad and Javier on what that specific implementation will be. Thank you for your comments there. Next, we talked about the integrated resource plan process, and that will be is expected to be submitted at the end of February as a timeline reminder. And we are expecting a public presentation of that information. I believe that is scheduled to be prior to the February board meeting. And so that would be a time when we would present information to the public for input on the IRP. No specific action needed there, but just a reminder of the expected timeline of that information as it relates to the other decarbonization and policy work that is going on in the systems committee now. We also talked about the Bright battery project, and I think we'll have a presentation on that in a second. And so with that, that concludes the things that we had discussed in the systems pre-meeting. I appreciate the additional comments from board members who were not there in guiding us where we will be going in the future. And so with that, I'd like to move to the next item on the systems committee agenda for today, the RFP 5925. I'm expecting this is Troy. Is that correct, Troy?
Yes, it is. And if you want to move to the picture, I think we have a picture of what we're going to be discussing. But just to start off, we have 3 approval items for your consideration today. And I'm very pleased to say that we've received some very competitive responses. This is a difficult market, but we've got some good news here, and can't wait to share this all with you. This first particular item is a substation electric equipment construction service contract. You can see what they're going to construct in the pictures next to it. But it's for a new substation in the Sarpy County area to support the growing load and needs of that community. It's a labor contract, and we need to have this because we don't have the excess capacity within our staff with the other work that we're trying to get accomplished from a maintenance standpoint. The contracts for installation of things like steel supports, which you can see in the picture, insulators, breakers, switches, all kinds of fun substation equipment. We received 4 responses. 4 were legally responsive. 3 were technically responsive. The one that was not responsive was due to the fact that they did not provide welding certification, and which is really important if you think about having steel structures, having good solid welding taking place on those assets. The construction would start in January and be completed by May of 2022. As we went through the evaluation, Highmark was the lowest and best bid. They're a South Dakota company which has worked on OPPD property before, so they're not new to us. They also work on many of our neighboring utilities in their services also. We see them as a reputable company that delivers a good product. With that, we are asking the board to approve this particular contract, and I will open it up for any questions. Pretty simple. You've seen several of these over the past couple of years.
So looking for hands, looking for head waving, listening for anybody to voice anything. Let's call that the standard 7 seconds. And as soon as we do not have any comments at this time, thank you, Troy. I think we can move to the next item.
All right, the next item is a manhole duct line construction contract for distribution services. And I believe we also have a picture for that. But the purpose of this is for construction services to build concrete encased manhole duct systems in our distribution system. And it's required to make sure that we have proper service that's delivered to our customers in the Northwest Sarpy County area. And it's happening at the same time that there's a road project taking place, so the timing's good. The customer need date for the road work, along with current workloads that we have in our need, to serve customers, requires us to go outside for a labor contract again for this type of work. And just to give you an idea, the scope of work, there's around 26 manholes, just under 2 miles of concrete encased duct lines, and several other little small work-related items that help support this. The route is along both the not I-180, but 180th Street and Meridian Parkway, if you're familiar where that is in our service territory. We had 5 proposals that were deemed both legally and technically responsive, which is fantastic. Valley Corporation's pricing on the bid tab sheet, if you all noticed though, had OPPD supplied materials included in it, but the proposal clearly stated that their part of the bid was lower, and which is noted in the document that you see in front of you, making them by far the lowest and best bid. Valley has a good reputation. They're close. They're in Valley, Nebraska. They've performed work for us before, as well as other utilities in this part of the region. The engineer's estimate was between that bid and the next bid, so relatively close in that manner. And so based on the legal and technical economic evaluations, we are recommending that we move forward with this contract with Valley Corp. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
Great, same as the last item. Technical details here. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about what you've seen presented? Seeing head shaking.
I'll throw one out.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, but you don't have to answer it. It's not, it's just personal information gathering here. How do they get compaction around all of those tubes? I mean, it looks like that's kind of a tough job.
They've got machinery that helps them to do that. Weather conditions make a difference too. It's not unnormal when we have things that are dug this time of year. That the good thing is, we have folks that go back and look at the areas after we've installed things that are underground to make sure nothing is settled over time. But for the most part, they have the equipment that they need to make sure compaction takes place.
All right, thanks.
All right, I don't see any other hands or hear any other questions. So I think we're good there. Troy, I think you also have the next item as well.
Yes, I did. So this particular contract is related to one of our generators. And based on some recent inspections that we had of the generator, it was determined that a section of Sarpy Unit 5 had some localized damage to one of the turbine components. And based upon that damage, the turbine is significantly limited from an operational standpoint until we get that addressed and fixed. And so for the most part, it's limited to emergency operations at this point. What's kind of interesting about Sarpy 5, and it's unusual in this nature, is that particular unit has 2 components that can be decoupled and still run at 50% capacity. So half of that unit's still available. The other piece is for that emergency reasons only for now. And so it's extremely important as we think about this type of resource for our generation portfolio. It's fast start and stop. It provides a lot of support to the grid from a reliability standpoint, and it's part of our accredited capacity portfolio. This work is proprietary in nature. It's kind of a unique generator, and thus we need to work with the original manufacturer to work through the process of fixing this. They have the tooling, parts, and expertise needed to move forward with this fix. As you can see from the information that was provided, the district's engineer has certified the nature of this work is such that we need to have a contract with that original manufacturer to complete. I would characterize this work as not terribly abnormal for natural gas generators. We've seen it before, not only in our fleet, but across the fleet in the United States. This will take approximately 68 days to complete, which would take place early next year. And so thus we are asking the board for the ability for us to negotiate directly and enter a contract with the original manufacturer for this. And with that being said, I will open it up for questions.
So as a reminder, the last two items were contract award, and this is the negotiate and enter into a contract. So this is the action item. We will not see additional details. It is handled internally by staff. So just a reminder of the process we're describing on this item relative to the last item. And we've done this before, but just want to make sure everyone is clear about what is intended here. Does anyone have any comments or questions about this particular unit and the repairs that are necessary? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Kudos, Troy, on the excellent presentation on all three of those items and the work to keep things moving forward. Next up is the Nuclear Oversight Committee report. And it looks like that's going to be Tim Euling. Tim, are you there?
I am here. Good afternoon. In addition to the routine maintenance and testing that we do each month, there are three items that I'd like to highlight. The first is that reactor vessel segmentation activity, which we know is going to be the key driver over the next year. We did get the internals removed from the vessel itself. Those have subsequently been split up into two subparts, one at each cutting station. We've completed the radiological surveys, and we've started the saw cutting on those that's conducted underwater. The saws are proving to cut at the design speed, so that project is moving along well. In the middle of that is maintaining water chemistry. The key point of that is to maintain clarity so that we can see those saws and the work that's being done underwater to ensure protection of our employees. If we move outside the containment structure, we have completed the deconstruction of the service building. We had previously completed the internal portion of that, but now the frame, the structure, the roof, all of that has been demolished and that material removed from site. And we also put a large focus on clearing of underground utilities so we could get those pulled up and those holes and trenches filled back in before winter came around and we had to deal with snow and the hazards that would create. And then just to finish that one up, we are continuing with the internal demolition of the turbine building and the intake structure. The turbine building in particular is going to be the longer one of those. That's another 6 or 8 months of work on the internals before we get to the external of that building. And then lastly, last month I talked about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Decommissioning Oversight Committee having been on site. This month we had the account engineers from American Nuclear Insurers on site. They provide insurance to ourselves, the other decommissioning and operating plants throughout the United States. They've been doing external or remote inspections throughout decommissioning and when we were an operating plant. But this was the first time they were able to come on site since the pandemic began to really put eyes on the work that we're doing against our processes and procedures and ensuring that we're meeting all of the requirements that we need to meet for our insurance obligations. And pending any questions, that's the end of my report.
Great, thanks very much, Tim. A lot of important things continuing to happen there. The reactor vessel in particular, I'm always impressed with the way that we have planned that and glad to hear that it's moving along as scheduled. That is extremely complicated and important process. So thanks to you and the team who are continuing that. Do any other directors have any thoughts, comments, questions about the ongoing decommissioning work? Seeing heads shaking, seeing no hands raised. All right, great. Lots of presentations that cover everything that the directors might want to know. So again, thanks very much, Tim. Next would be the Bright Battery Project. And I'm not sure who's going to present this one, so I'll let whoever that is speak up.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Director Williams. We're going to turn it over to Ms. Courtney Kennedy, but this is a very, very exciting project for us. We're glad to bring it back in front of the board and to allow folks visibility and awareness to the effort. And there was a lot of nuance to work through between the sourcing of the project and the location of the project and all the nuances in between. So thank you again for the opportunity. And Courtney, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon to the board and anyone else joining in. Excited to give a quick update on the Bright Battery project, as Brad introduced so well. So for a quick reminder, or if it's new to folks listening in, this is a project that's funded through a grant with the Nebraska Environmental Trust. It will be located in Cass County near OPPD substation near Weeping Water. It will have a distribution interconnection, and this is a standalone battery project on our system that ultimately enhances us to enable operational learning and enhance our operations of the system. So you can see a quick couple of pictures there orientating where Weeping Water is and then what this would look like inside the substation. Next slide, please. So we've tried to keep the board and the public updated on the major milestones of this project, and we've started to really check off boxes, which is exciting. So really starting with the grant award in June of 2020, we spent a lot of time in that R of Bright researching through RFIs, vendor workshops, and ultimately bringing on an owner's engineer. This past summer, we spent time with the RFP analyzing proposals, and I'm happy today to really talk about our milestone of awarding the battery contract. Ultimately, we plan to have this operational by next fall. Next slide, please. So the big news of the day is we have awarded a contract with WEG Electric Corporation. This is an engineer, procure, construct, or an EPC contract with this company. And so they will be providing the battery container, which is Build Your Dreams. I'll talk about that here on the next slide. Indie Energy will be our energy management system. And then Interconnection Systems Incorporated, or ISI, will perform our civil and electrical work. And they're actually out of Central City, Nebraska. If we go to the next slide, we'll jump into a little bit more detail around the actual battery itself. So the BYD, or Build Your Dreams, is a Cube Pro battery. They are providing both the container and the lithium iron phosphate battery cells. You'll note there that this battery container uses a liquid cooling system that really regulates the battery packs to provide multiple levels of fire protection. So as we went through analysis on these batteries, obviously safety and protection systems was important to us. This battery is a 1 megawatt, 2-hour duration. You'll see there it's actually a 2.4-hour duration, and that's really so that by year 20, the battery life, it will have that 80% capacity. And so this is something you spec in ahead of time, you overbuild so that you have the 20-year battery life. So that is an example picture of what will be joining us down in Cass County next year. One more slide, and then I'll open it up for questions. So wanted to hit on our next steps with communication and outreach. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do at the substation, getting the battery in, plugging it into the system, and that'll kick off in 2022. But in parallel, we have several publications that we are working on. Really today is the exciting kickoff of an announcement with WEG, starting here at the committee meeting. In addition, there's internal and external communications, so there will be a wire story next week. We'll provide an update in the January outlets bill. And then we continue to keep our Community Connect page updated. And so we're working to update that with these details for folks following along on that platform. And then finally, we have partnered with our external relations and community folks to continue conversations with Weeping Water and other surrounding communities as we begin to install and operate this battery, making sure first responders, et cetera, are prepared. So a lot of work to come, but very excited to celebrate, as Brad said, a big milestone for this project and for OPPD with our first utility scale battery. I will open it up for any questions.
Great, Courtney, I'll jump in here. Can you remind us of the expected operation of the battery and what types of things it will be expected to be doing and what types of things it might not be expected to be doing? Because I know they can be operated in a whole bunch of different fashions.
Yes, great question. So this will be a standalone battery, not paired with a renewable asset. And so really our focus is to bring enhancements to the system, specifically down in Cass County. This will provide voltage support and some services with the inverter. It'll also be able to, we'll be able to experience some of the peak shifting or energy arbitrage. And at some point in the future, we may put this into the energy market or the SPP marketplace and start to understand some of those products available in the market.
Great, thanks. Director Yoder.
Working on the mute there. So this is great. Of course, you know, the best county in the surface area is Cass County, and this only improves that. I'm happy to see, well, it's a good recognition here, and it's an opportunity to make the comment that it's not just the existence of the new technologies or the acquisition of the new technologies that move us into the utility of the future, but it's the opportunity to learn how to integrate our own systems with this new technology. And I think it's real important, and I'm thankful that the NET was able to fund it to help us do that. So great. I don't know if this is a second element here. It doesn't really mean anything. I guess I just wanted to observe if it's true. Is BYD, is that part of, does that have an Omaha connection?
BYD does not have an Omaha connection. The ISI is local in Nebraska, though.
So this is a different BYD than the Berkshire Hathaway investment.
Yes, BYD is out of, is out of China.
Then it is the same.
Rick, for clarification, I do think that there is probably some corporate relationship there that happened a number of years ago. So I do think that you are correct about there having been a corporate connection, but I don't think that that is material to the selection or the details.
Sure. No. I'm just trying to find all of the good things about this, you know, Cass County, Berkshire Hathaway. All right. Very good. No, it's wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Director Yoder, this is Jeff Bishop. I would highlight when I was employed by Pacific or owned by Mid-American, they had gone through and done the acquisition, or Berkshire had done the acquisition of BYD, to your point, about a decade ago. So there is a connection from my perspective.
Thank you, Jeff. Javier, did you have thoughts or comments you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I'm following in the steps of Director Yoder, just talking about good, positive local news. I had the pleasure of sitting down for coffee with Mayor Mike Barrett from the city of Weeping Water, as well as with Linda Fleming, the city clerk. And so we visited the community, and they're excited about the project. We talked about the collaboration, the need for education, not only for the community, but also with the fire department and emergency management, making sure that we are collaborating and coordinating with everyone around in the community. So I just wanted to highlight that and how important it is for us to have these community connections and relationships across our service territory, right? And this is just a great example of how that works and the advantage of being public power and really serving all of our communities. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you for that observation.
Great, thanks, Javier. And I guess one last question. We initiate pilot projects in order to learn about technology that we foresee as high potential for the future. Does anyone have comments about how we will learn from this particular project and where we might see additional planning or project implementation as it relates to the strategic initiatives or any of the other work that we've got coming in the future? Do we have an idea of where this will kind of feed back in and how we'll take some of that learning back into our future resource planning or other processes?
Yeah, it'll be an integral part of the system planning and the things that maybe we've talked about previously around voltage and what the capability of the asset will be very, very important. So in a nod to Director Yoder's comments around the value of operational experience, I think that's a big piece of this evolution. So correct.
Okay, I don't see other hands, comments, questions, but appreciation to the team, Courtney and everyone for the great work on this. This is very exciting. Looking forward to that story in the wire and more people in the public understanding that battery technology is here. It's being implemented at OPPD, and it is going to be providing valuable services to our community, specifically at Weeping Water, and then hopefully in other places as well. So thanks very much for all of that. And with that, I think that concludes the systems committee. And so I will hand it over to, I guess, Amanda, or do you want to hand it to public information? How do we want to, the next committee?
I'll take it. Thank you. So we had originally planned a short break, but given that we really just all had lunch, I think we'll move right into PI. So Director Mulhoff.
Thank you. We met on December 7th, which kind of seems like a long time ago, but here we are. And we got an update on legislative and regulatory, and we'll have that for the entire board here in a minute. We spent some time reviewing the final corporate operating plan, and we've already heard about that. And then we spent some time looking at economic development policy revision, which is SD 11. And the committee kind of came to consensus about the kind of broad direction that we wanted to go. And we also have Director Yoder's red line copy of the SD 11, and we sent those back to staff, and the expectation is that they will come back to us in February to the committee with some language that we can look at to move forward with revisions on SD 11. So that's kind of where we are, and we updated that on the board work plan. And so if anyone has questions for me, I will take them. Otherwise, we will move on to the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs report. I'm looking for hands raised. Don't see any. Okay. Lisa and Tim and
yeah, thank you.
Take it.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Director Mulhoff. And as you heard from Javier, we have been hitting the road, meeting with senators, county commissioners, city administrators. So we never have any path underneath our feet that is not dry. So we keep going as we meet in between all of these meetings. So with that, we are getting ready for our legislative session and meeting with senators to find out what's on their mind, what's on their agendas, and so forth. But I do want to go through and just recap a little bit about the legislative hearings that we've had over the past few months. And then we'll talk a little bit more about on the national level. So with that, Mr. O'Brien.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon. I'm excited to provide an update to you today, and I want to thank the team that has put in so much work over the last few months and really the last 60 days, closing things out for the year and then looking towards next year. As Lisa teed up, we want to close up the legislative work for 2021 and give you a sense of what that looks like, and then a preview of where our focuses will be and perhaps some of the bills that will be introduced in 2022 from the Nebraska legislature standpoint. And then also some updates in Congress, as there has been some movement and especially some things of interest to the district. So first slide here is on interim studies. And so I'm trying to report on things that we're close to or around our last report, if there's been things that have changed or have not. Really one item here, real close to the board committee meeting. Actually, there's two items, excuse me. this has been an annual hearing on the position of retirement funds, excuse me, and John Thurber spoke on behalf of the district for that hearing. Again, very similar to done in past practice. No questions of OPPD at that particular hearing. The last, which has been interesting to us, and then I'll speak to it about 2022, is related to taxation and electric vehicles. There was no hearing for this particular legislative study, so really no movement on that section. If you want to go to the next slide, Mo, this is Legislative Resolution 136, and this was around the polar vortex and the after action plans taken by our industry. The hearing was just a little bit ago. No major changes. The Natural Resources Committee will be submitting a study to the Executive Board now between the legislative session starting next month. We've not seen a draft yet. I don't know if we will, but that'll be submitted to the committee with some potential recommendations. We are hearing there is likely to be a bill or two related to the findings from the legislative study. Usually by now we have a good sense of maybe what that looks like, but I know there is a lot of work that the committee is working to finalize. So that is really the status I have for the legislative hearing that Chair Bogner represented the district about 45 days ago on that. So that is where the legislative hearing status is at. If you want to go to the next slide, we're going to pivot to 2022. Lisa mentioned earlier, we have been very much hitting the road to meet many of our elected officials the last 60 days, from mayors, city council, senators, et cetera, trying to understand what's on their mind and prepare for 2022, and then really share many of the great things that the district is doing, just as Javier cited about the Bright Battery project, decarbonization, just the development of so much of our infrastructure. So the legislature, it's the 60-day session. It starts on January 5th at 10 o'clock. Bill introduction takes place the first 10 days, and so that takes us to January 20th. So that time period is very, very busy for us. We read every bill, look at them. Many folks on the call are subject matter experts among others across the district. So we review those and look at potential impacts or opportunities to the district, and then work very, very closely with other utilities in the Nebraska Power Association. So that first month is very, very busy for us. So watch for real-time updates from Lisa on those items. The session does conclude on the 20th of April. We are eagerly waiting the first day. That is when the speaker really lays out the process priorities for the session, and so there'll be a good report right when the legislative session begins. So with that, because this is a 60-day session, much of our work actually carries over from last year. So bills that didn't move from a committee can be heard or moved this coming year. So I have 4 slides just on those topics, very much like you saw us close the session, but just wanted to provide a reminder on some of the items that we've heard may be of interest. If there are some that you've heard about, we'd love to have that information, in this quick setting or an offline version as well. So 4 quick slides on what are topics or concepts from the last session that are could be discussed this session, and then I've got 1 slide on 2022. So again, 4 slides. There's been really no movement on this particular slide of bills that could further move from committee, but I did want to make sure that you had this list. If you want to go to the next slide, there's a couple here that I wanted to point out. LB 460, this is a bill that relates to the utilization of dark fiber, the infrastructure that public power entities have. It's been a topic related to broadband the last couple sessions. That bill is something that OPPD has been actively engaged with, so I highlight that for you. Senator Brewer also had a couple bills related to eminent domain, wind regulations, et cetera. That's been a frequent topic of his. There could be discussion again this session on those as the bills are still in committee. Next slide, if you would, please. There's been really no movement here. One that is of interest from OPPD and others in the industry is LB 512, and this is to adopt the Critical Infrastructure Utility Protection Act. It helps us have access to things that may be needed in a tough time or a pandemic or natural disaster. So that's something the committee where that bill has may take that up again this year, but did want to flag that out and something that our team has been interested to move forward. The last slide here, no major updates. You want to go just one more slide, please. There we go. No major updates on these topics. We know net metering is always something that has came up lately. There has been great accolades from the board's leadership and direction on adjusting our net metering rate just a few months back. We've heard great things there. So there could be other net metering related things, or we've heard a few things to say, hey, look what OPPD's done. So I just highlight that as that's something that we're hearing, meeting with folks and staff as well. Next slide, please. This is the 2022 placeholder. And so I went through many of the carryover bills. And then there's the stimulus or the American Rescue Recovery Plan bills. So the state is receiving or received a significant amount of money, and there will be a lot of discussions on where those dollars go. There was a hearing a couple months ago. We expressed our interest in potentially utilizing some of those funds to help with enhancements to our system. Could be things from tree trimming, as we talked about in the budget. It could be doing different things on the distribution system, reclosures or bearing line or those kinds of things. So we've placed in that interest, and it's been reasonably well received. So that is a great thing. Also, the potential for some other dollars to support our customers' needs. Should they have them, we've had a good success doing that as well. So we're actively having those conversations. I put tax policy. There seems to always be some sort of tax policy. So we're always on the watch out of, what's exempted, what isn't. Are there things that affect our business or small or large customers? It's just always something related to tax. And so just a keen eye on there. No specific bills have been sent to us, but it is always something that we take a keen eye on. This has been a little different. Usually by now we start to see draft language of bills. That's not fully been the case. We've seen and heard, as I mentioned on LR 136, there's some interest in potentially doing some bills there. There's a lot of talk about electric vehicles, and I think a lot of excitement around electric vehicles. For example, there's a bill that we've caught wind of. Could there be a grant program or something to that nature from the American Rescue Plan? So that's one thing that's been of interest. As stated earlier, there was another hearing that didn't take place on terms of taxation of electric vehicles. So there's a lot of things there, and then also how to utilize some of the further federal funds that will be coming to the state for electric vehicles. I see a hand from Director Williams.
Oh, yeah, thanks very much. Sorry, Craig, I saw your hand also, but yeah, related to the electric vehicles, the bills there, those are in support of electrification of transportation, right? I know that there have been discussions that were sometimes maybe not especially well informed on the way in which electric vehicles are taxed or recover the costs related to the road repairs, not using gas, no gas tax. So the target of the legislation is to support electric vehicles. Is that the general concept?
Director Williams, great question. There has been all types of those conversations that you just described that we've heard about. One was absolutely potentially taxation or road funding because they don't utilize the gas tax. I was also just using this as sort of a catch-all to capture the spirit of the topic for electric vehicles. And as mentioned, potentially grant funding for further EV charging stations is another rumored bill. So there's a lot out there. I don't have bill text to be precise from your very good question, but that was the intent of the bullet to say, the legislature is absolutely talking about electric vehicles is how I would summarize that.
And Tim, I can add a little bit more. I was just up in the Capitol, actually. You're right, Director Williams, it's a little bit of both. One, they're looking at putting some kind of fee on electric vehicles to try to make up for the loss of gas tax. They don't know what that's going to look like. They've been talking about that for years, but that's one thing that they talked about there. There's one on making sure that we have more money out of ARPA funds going to EV charging stations across. So using money for that, which will also help with the infrastructure money. There's also a new one that nobody's seen language on yet, but it's in other states, is on how do you charge for electric vehicle charging, because gas stations, truck stops, those folks would like to charge for that, not in a block, but by the kilowatt hour. And that right now, they can't do that by statute, and that's an issue that they have to look at. So those are the ones that we've kind of seen.
Thank you, Seth. I see Director Moody has a question as well.
Thank you, Tim. As always, appreciate the legislative overview and preview of the session. So thanks in advance for what I'm sure is going to be another fun session for you all. I am reflecting a little bit on, I think, the conversation we had a month ago when we announced the pilot program I'm not going to get the name right, theme for today, but the program wherein we're trying to minimize the energy burden, electric burden. I am but one director, so this is just what I would be interested in seeing from us is whether or not there's any legislative activity that starts to address that issue. And I guess what I'm thinking of in particular is not necessarily rate design, rate structure, net metering. I'm thinking about how do we really actually address the systemic issues that are creating a situation environment where we have many people that are experiencing an energy burden. So again, I don't know what activity is underway. I don't know the extent to which that's of interest to other board members, but it's very directly impacting our business. And to the extent that we can start to address it at a more systematic level, I'd be really interested. Thank you.
On Director Moody, I think there's one bill out there that I've heard of so far by Senator McCollister, which he's looking at the issue of, so everyone pays sales tax on electric sales, and taking a portion of that and putting that toward weatherization, which kind of gets at the root of the problem on high energy bills for rural low-income housing that may not be as efficient as possible. That's one way to do that there. The other way for us is just to make sure, and we're doing this, making sure that the funds that we got in the state budget for weatherization and the portion of LIHEAP going to weatherization are being used efficiently and quickly to make sure and get the root of that problem out of there. That's the only thing that we have heard so far on that front on the state side.
That's helpful, Seth. And again, I don't have line of sight into, the possible bills that are being considered in rooms somewhere at this point. But as an example, and again, not sure if it's relevant, is, any legislative activity towards raising the minimum wage, really directing towards a living wage. That's, again, yes, weatherization, sure. But the reason that folks perhaps need some really significant help with weatherization to reduce their energy burden is because they don't have the means by which to pay for it and or to do the weatherization themselves. So again, I'm backing way up into kind of some systemic stuff. Again, I know that that's probably a stretch out of what we normally do. And again, practicing unity of control here. I'm but one director, but this is something that I just thought I'd flag again and is of interest to me.
Thank you, Director Moody. I too appreciate the stretch and knowing what's on your mind to make sure we're meeting the needs of the committee and reporting out on what we're hearing and seeing and potentially guiding as well. The last couple bullets here, broadband continues to be a topic that also is kind of a catch-all bullet. We have been very active in different types of things related to broadband, and I also equate that to pole attachments or also known as 5G as that deploys across the state. There's different kinds of things that come up very frequently as that infrastructure is deployed across the state that relates to our infrastructure. The last is climate and natural disasters. I believe we've talked several several years now on a climate action plan. That is, we're hearing that continues to be of interest. And then there's been a lot of work on flooding, natural disasters. If you might have tracked the Star Wars committee, I can't even remember what the acronym is other than Star Wars. They picked a good name for it. There's a lot of things across the state for water disasters, flooding, all those kinds of things are likely topics, and also part of the recovery fund budgeting as well. So there's just a lot of topics that have interest or on the edges of OPPD's business interests. So I will pause there. This concludes the end of what we have for the state legislative update.
Thank you, Tim. I think Director Williams had a follow-up, and then Director Yoder, did you have you can follow Eric?
Thanks very much. Director Moody highlighted he is one director. I guess I would like to express that I have a second director who also would appreciate anything that legislation can do to support our actions related to energy burden. There are indeed problems that cannot be solved by the electric utility independently. And I hope that there are solutions that are addressing more systemic issues, but specifically related to the way in which we set rates and the way in which our utility engages with the customers that we serve. I appreciate that we look into ways that we can provide opportunities or provide pilots and projects and programs which help people who are most in need, as was described in the CAP pilot that we talked about a little bit in the past. So I just wanted to make sure that I echo what Director Moody has expressed there. And if the legislature has any action in the direction of energy burden, I hope that we are supportive of policy that can help us to help people in our community who are in need. Thank you.
Yeah, without, I guess, well, I will be redundant. I just wanted to echo what I'm hearing from Directors Moody and Williams on this. I'll just note last month when the Energy Burden Project was presented, and we have our CAP on that. I was angling to give accolades sufficient or better than Director Moody's accolades for our good governance in how we were doing redistricting. I think we've done. I think the effort that OPPD has put forth so far is really a good job, and it is important. And I thank Director Moody for raising it. To recognize this is a multifaceted issue. It's complicated, and there are many contributors to this, and I think it was pointed out as we looked at energy burden, it is not, OPPD could not do enough, nor should it do it all to solve the problem. It takes a lot of things. So I am thankful that we have the lobbying crew here to help us be watchful for other opportunities to apply and use levers. So thank you for that.
Thank you all for that
Okay,
insight.
we will.
Very helpful. And Tim, if you want to go ahead and go to the federal side, if there's no
Okay,
further
perfect.
questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Just really one backdrop slide, and I'll speak to this because this is what we provided to the Public Information Committee, and no surprise, things have changed, and actually a little positive too. So things are happening. Seth was in DC last week, and his message has really been, hey, with the reconciliation package, you need to make sure that public power has a seat at the table, and I'll talk to you about that. There's been some good success there. We've been heavily focused first on the infrastructure package and where those dollars will flow. And so one of the things, Chris Zavlasek, that's our grant lead, is on our team and reports in my team, and then to Lisa ultimately. So we have good line of sight of what's coming up. And so there was several webinars and other things even last week on that funding, and things are starting to move. Even just yesterday, there was direction on I think it's close to $7.5 or $8 billion on the national EV charging rollout. And so that's a joint effort between the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation. They're going to publish guidelines in February, I think early February, and then more standards in May. So that is really starting to move, and I thought that was a good announcement just yesterday. The federal agencies are also starting their listening tour to set up the program. So to give you an example, there's one later this month on school bus electrification, for example. And so we're keenly watching those. We're also working internally about what kinds of programs or projects make sense, or partners for us as well. And then there are some of the dollars that flow directly to the state that we talked about the last time we got together. So this will take months and months, just as on the state side, we talked about the last round of stimulus dollars and then the budget bills that will occur in the legislature. It will be several months that you'll hear us continually provide updates, but wanted to just let you know that things are moving, we're focused on it, and we're encouraged by some of the things that are coming our way. In Congress right now, they're very much focused on the debt ceiling and to finish the annual defense funding. So those are important. And then there's the reconciliation process or the Build Back Better proposal. We got some really great news Saturday, actually, that the Senate Finance Committee put out their draft, and we were really pleased to see that they took the feedback and kept in the ability for public power to be competitive on some of the investment tax and other structures for a variety of things. This is an investment tax credit for transmission, for example, solar, hydrogen, sequestration. There's just a lot of things that at least held into the bill. And so that was a great gift this weekend. So we're continually reviewing that, but pleased to see that is there. It's a direct refund is really how that process would work. The other thing that's going on is that there will absolutely be more revisions, and the bird proofing it is what's going on, if you've heard that term. And really what that means is they're making sure that the proposal can pass with simple majority, and that it really balances the funding. So that's going on right now as well. They may or may not get that done before the holiday season. I think that's about anybody's best guess, but we're encouraged with the progress to date. So I will pause there and see if there's any other questions that you might have, or that concludes our planned remarks for today.
Thank you,
Right.
Tim, and the team for
our pleasure.
Things. So I don't see any hands raised. Anyone want to speak up? So thanks again, and that ends the PI committee report.
All right, next up we have a confirmation of agenda. All right, so presently we have almost all of our action items on the consent agenda, with the 2022 final corporate operating plan slated to be an action item. Would any of the directors like to request that consent items be moved to discussion? All right, looks like we are good with this agenda. And I guess just for the public, the corporate operating plan includes the rate action as well. That's part of the resolution. Okay. Plan. So we have made some edits to this work plan. We can go on. Moving a couple executive leadership team members into place here, and generally we're still moving along. We do have a new column, target completion date, that we have not started to fill out yet. I think that presently it's identified that that Mo would be filling this out, I think, and or populating these dates. I'm not sure that that is Correct. So I'd like some direction, maybe from Scott. Would you be able to provide some direction on what we should be doing with this column and who might be providing that information?
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Bogner. I think the target completion date ultimately should be a conversation between committee chair and the president and CEO. It's an opportunity to align the work of the organization to make sure that expectations around deadlines are not conflicting or creating undue pressure given the internal things that are happening within the organization. And I believe that that's how it was intended to work. To your point, we've not added those yet. I think it's the beginning of the maturation, if you will, of this work plan process.
Absolutely.
I do realize I just spoke to that. I do see CEO Fernandez's head nodding, and I believe I see other committee chairs head nodding and thumbs up. So I just want to make sure that I'm aligned.
A clarifying
Okay, very
question
good.
then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so would I just initiate that discussion, or does that come out of the next committee meeting? How would you suggest the next steps?
So here's what I suggest. I think this is something that we have been implicitly talking about target completion dates. I would say, for example, in your case, Director Yoder, you discussed the dates, Q1 of 22 as the date. So we've been talking about the completion date. This is maybe more formalizing that piece. So I will take that as an action item with Scott and with Mo, and start reflecting those dates, acknowledging that those target completion dates may very well change, right, as priorities change and workloads change. But I don't believe it's necessarily a new item. It may be a new column for us to report, but we will populate it, and we will have these populated by the next committee meeting. If that's clear.
Yep.
Dr. Moody?
Yeah, let me just gently suggest an amendment to that. I think that's all well and good, practicing improv, and a target completion date just simply says when it's going to be done. It doesn't necessarily say when the work is going to occur. And I guess my brain goes to what the Gantt chart might look like if we mapped all of these out against one another to try and see, when the hotspots are for a ton of work, and perhaps they're color coded based on which committee. I don't know, just a thought, but it target date is great, but I'm really interested in making sure that we kind of map this out in a way, and especially as we're pulling in action items from the workshop. I think there's even a higher risk of complexity and things getting sort of lost in the weeds and too many things happening at once. So if the governance committee needs to take a look, which is to say, Scott, if you and I need to give some thought to how that might show up, I'd be more than happy to hop on that.
Dr. Moody,
Just a thought. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I think that's a great question. We can make this as simple or complex, and I do think it's important to highlight the potential for overlap or conflict, and certainly would work with CEO Fernandez and you to make sure that that bridge between the CEO and the board with regards to setting this is built the way it was intended to be built. And I take that as a governance action item.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know that we had the board work plan documents also in our governance discussion earlier today as we were talking about the agenda planning for 2022. I guess I'm just not sure, Scott, perhaps you can help me. Have these work plan items been incorporated in some way in each of the monthly agenda planning, or is the monthly agenda that we looked at earlier today really more about items that the internal business units at OPPD know that they're going to need to have in front of the board?
Monthly is a reflection of the items that we as staff envision bringing to the board, primarily for either reporting or for approval. There are separate tabs for the board work plan, parking lot, and completed items. Those are kept separately.
Okay.
They are included in the work. They are included in the annual work plan, but they are kept as separate tabs, not as part of the monthly tab. So if you look towards the very beginning of the document, you would see those spaces.
Okay. I'm
The other-
wondering if that starts to speak to Craig's concept or suggestion of like Gantt chart and like looking at like how it might slot in, how each of these items might slot in over the course of the year. So
Right. I would add that the monthly items also reflect official reporting items and action items teeing up for the board decision, whereas often the board items are issues that are sometimes worked. There are oftentimes a lot of, for lack of more eloquent expression, sausage making to get to a point where you're in a space of having a recommendation or an action or a reporting item to be brought forward.
right.
Such as the topic of monitoring report revision. How
Let
that
me
might need to.
if I may, and thank you, Director Moody, for the comment. I think it's great. Not only just the target, but manage these. We have excellent project managers here in the company. We have good project management disciplines here. This is one that it sounds to me like it shouldn't be that hard for us to put it together in a project management type of way. Not all work streams are created equal. Right, even though each one of them have the same one row, some of them might be a very heavy row, some of them might be an easier one. So let me go back to the team and propose a way for us to further improve our reporting and really just reflecting the maturation that's happening here. So I'm really excited about this. So I'll bring something back next month.
Okay, very good. I think that concludes our meeting today. Before I do that, is there any other comment or question that needs to be asked before we close this out? I will just remind everyone that the board meeting on Thursday is scheduled to begin at 6 p.m. That's an hour later than normal. So I just want to hit that home. You might be really early for the meeting if you show up for the 5 p.m. time. So we'll see you all at 6 p.m. on Thursday at the Douglas County, the City County Chambers. Thank you.